Dear speakers, just to notify you that you are live now.
No, I mean,
All right. Sorry, guys. Sorry about that. We have a fantastic session planned out for today, and my sincere apologies for being a bit late on this. But I wanted to end up introducing the subject matter, and the subject matter is digitization in Africa. I assume everyone can hear me correctly. Am I all right?
Yes.
Okay. So we are aware that digitization will provide an important avenue for African economies to leapfrog not only in financial development, but also across other sectors of the economy. And we're also very aware that this past, let's say, 7, 8 months have been very critical in terms of the development of Africa, especially given the fact that COVID has been a major impediment and or potential driver of digitization in Africa. We are going to look at key issues regarding the impact of digitalization with respect to COVID and its impact on the continent. And some of the themes that we're going to address is, the role of digitization in Africa and, the key to enabling economies for the development of the continent. Our first panelist, I'm going to end up introducing is Nureshka. She is, Nureshka, you are, you could say what, a techpreneur, someone who has, driven a lot of economic development with youth in Africa and now are working with women. We have Frederick, who is the CEO of Jobs for Africa and someone who is, a key driver for employment on the continent. We have Gibran, who you have worked quite a bit in policy development related to, the role of technology in Africa and promoting, youth-based entrepreneurship. And we have two more, which I'm not sure if they're on right now, but we have Sibongia, who is a key proponent of looking at digital technologies and enabling companies to improve digitization in Africa, and has actually, is a success case for someone on the continent who has taken a startup and is now working with different partners in the UK, US, and Australia. And then we have someone who is a policy expert, Ida, who is, one of the key enablers of technologies on the continent. So we're looking at a very fantastic sort of panel discussion. So in order for me to start, how about I start with you, Nureshka? You've been in the digital space for a few years in South Africa, and you have seen a massive transformation in digitization in your country. As we see digitization is increasing on the continent and more pockets of Africa are experiencing higher rates of internet penetration, what would you say as being one of the greatest challenges you faced in the early days of this sort of net penetration? And what should young entrepreneurs look at when launching their own businesses?
Sure. Thank you, Ali, for that question. And it's great to be here at African Innovation Week. I think one of the greatest challenges in the early days was educating people and trying to convince them that e-commerce would work in Africa. Many believed that they were not ready for it, and now look at it. Online and e-commerce is one of the thriving businesses in Africa. A big part of that internet penetration was educating people on e-commerce, on how it worked, on how safe it actually is, and the advantages. My advice to entrepreneurs is to bootstrap their businesses. By bootstrapping your business, you end up saving on a lot of the costs. Instead of outlaying money and then carrying debt, I would work on starting an online platform, definitely, rather than setting up a physical shop because of the rent and then the overhead. And you actually have limited working hours. So I would definitely say an online business is also much scalable and affordable business to operate. So it's definitely something that young entrepreneurs need to take into consideration.
And related to this, I mean, how do you, when you have limited funds, how do you bootstrap? Because this is a key issue that many young entrepreneurs are facing. So what could you recommend they could potentially do to raise capital as well? Because bootstrapping is difficult.
Sorry, can you just repeat that question, please? I missed the beginning of it.
I said that bootstrapping is difficult because many entrepreneurs, especially young entrepreneurs, don't have the access to capital as others would. So what could you recommend as some of the strategies that they're able to look at to at least have that sound sort of financial base?
Sure. So there are a lot of initiatives and organizations that do actually provide resources So I know for a fact Standard Bank has some initiatives going. ABSA had initiatives going. Facebook has initiatives going. So there's a lot of places that do have resources, that do have funding. They have innovation hubs. They have incubators. And I think if entrepreneurs are really serious, they should actually search for these incubators and innovation hubs and put through their proposal. For an example, African Innovation Week, they're having, I think, about 200 pitches. And if you were able to pitch your business proposal, you could have had that access to capital and get started on your business.
Okay. All right. No, thank you. Frederick, you are someone who has worked in government and NGOs for quite some time, and as co-founder for Jobs for Africa, you have seen certain key challenges with respect to job creation. What do you see as the major challenges in Africa currently facing job creation, and how can the digital world, on this notion of digitization, enable greater youth employment, entrepreneurship, and this sort of drive toward economic development?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. As the co-founder of the Jobs for Africa Foundation, I think we were driven by the fact that if I consider the pre-COVID time, we were talking of 6 of the world's fastest growing economies being in Africa. But the challenge was the growth that we were witnessing was not inclusive enough to be able to create or absorb the millions of African youth that are joining the labor market every year. Just to quote some statistics, we have on average 18 million youth joining the labor market. If you consider the school system, universities, vocational training, and other institutions, but only 3 million jobs are created in what we call the formal economy in Africa, because we have the formal and the informal. Actually, 80% of African economies are informal. So meaning that 15 million find themselves, on the wayside. And that's why, despite the fact that some countries were talking of 10% economic growth, you see youth, trying to go to Europe because they think that they are going to have more opportunities there. Or you see youth joining what we call extremist groups to fight, in Nigeria, Boko Haram, or in Somalia, Al-Shabaab. And so youth employment has actually become a national security issue. For Jobs for Africa, what we felt was that there's something we can do because there's so much going for the continent. When you consider the mineral wealth, when you consider even the youthful population, the African population, the median age is 18 years. In Nordic countries, it's around 47. So this youthful population is a huge opportunity, but we need to make the necessary investments. And the necessary investments are basically what we are talking about, making sure that we provide the youth with the necessary education, with the necessary skills, so that they are not only able to respond to the labor market needs of today, but also the labor market needs of tomorrow, because you have to anticipate the fact that the world of work is changing and innovation is critical. Investment in what we call STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and these are the foundational training of countries like South Korea, for example. They've done so much with their youth, invested so much in skills building that that's why they are selling to us Samsung and other innovative ideas. So what I'm simply saying is that jobs are going to be created by the private sector. You need an enabling environment, but at the same time, we need to look at the supply side. What are the skills that the businesses that are going to be created and developed are going to need? And when we make those investments, then we are going to make sure that labor meets supply.
Okay. Now related to that, I mean, I'm glad that you ended up mentioning this aspect of, what are some of the key industries? When one looks at the future of work, one ends up realizing that, more and more, especially with the pandemic, being in the face of the entire global community right now, but in particular looking at Africa, this concept of the future of work and where it's going. You mentioned STEM, STEM development, science, technology, engineering, and math. Do you feel that the governments are doing enough for, to drive this sort of agenda? We do see major hubs such as, major tech hubs such as Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and Egypt really trying to promote ICT development. But what could some of the other governments on the continent do to really drive this sort of, tech engagement to enable greater digitization of specific, products or services? But how do they do this when they don't necessarily have strong bases in STEM?
Yes, I'm happy you asked that question, because recently there was a report by the World Economic Forum which talked about the tech hubs to watch beyond the Silicon Valley. And very pleased you mentioned Kenya. Kenya was one of those mentioned alongside Singapore and others. So there are governments that have realized that this is going to be the future, especially if we make the necessary investments for the youth. You're seeing youth becoming very tech savvy and competing with the best in the world. It is true that certain governments have not realized the importance of this. And that's why, as Jobs for Africa Foundation, we are trying to do a lot of lobbying, a lot of benchmarking, telling governments, if this country can do it, you can also do it. And this means that they also have to make the necessary investments, because without the infrastructure, then it's going to be very difficult. Recently, I was attending a digital event by the ILO, the African Union, and the International Telecoms Union. And one of the youths from South Africa said that, during these COVID times, it's so easy to say, let's work from home. But if one is living in the rural areas and has no access to the internet, then it's impossible for us to be able to work from home or look for jobs, from home. So governments have to realize the critical importance of making the necessary investments, doing benchmarking in terms of what other countries like Kenya have done, making the necessary investments in infrastructure and so forth.
Okay. Now, Ida, you lead a regional consortium on the development of technology on the continent. Given the fact that you are an authority in addressing technologies, and you are an enabler in achieving these sort of UN Sustainable Development Goals, how can emerging technologies for development be implemented on the continent? And what would you say are the most difficult aspects, given the fact that Frederick just mentioned right now that there are certain needs that government need to undertake, but yet are not necessarily happening? Hello, Ida. Hello, Ida? Okay, maybe we'll skip on to Gibran. Gibran, from a legal perspective, and someone who is, a proponent of entrepreneurship and technologies between, Europe and Africa, you specifically work in this sort of field of entrepreneurship and tech development, what are some of the issues that are impacting this sort of digital divide? And what would be a key driver to achieve a digital society where techpreneurs can benefit from the digital economy and enable job growth and job creation?
Thank you, Ali, for this question, and greetings to everyone. I'm really happy to be with you today. So I work in a legal tech startup, which is like a startup for legal services. But as you just said, I also work advocating for legal rights regarding tech, especially. So I will try to answer your question on these two aspects. But regarding the way techpreneurs could benefit the best the digital economy, I would say the first answer would be definitely a better internet access and quality. We're working here in Algeria, so with my startup, and I would definitely say that internet quality and access is a big issue. When we're trying to actually be at the level of international companies or international startups, we need to have the proper infrastructure. And the basis of that is just a good internet connection. I wanted to highlight that. I would say also more cooperation between big companies and startups. We really have to see startups as, like, let's say, a part of the big economy, and not just see them as an R&D like part of innovation, to see how their innovation could really benefit also big companies, because actually there is the market. I see many startups launching towards B2C, but I believe that in many countries right now in Africa, it will be really hard to have a scalable business model targeting only customers. I would really focus on businesses. That's what we've done with my startup, and that helps us actually build a B2C offer, but we cannot make sustainable profits targeting only B2C for now. So I would also really advocate for more B2B cooperation between startups and big companies. Also, access to early stage financing. It's really hard to access early stage. For instance, in Algeria, we have really few incubators. We have a legal framework which is not yet really adapted to what we can expect from, like, let's say, a startup ecosystem. We talk about how we can favor venture capital, for instance, give tax incentives to private capital to actually invest into startups. Obviously, you have the promotion of these kinds of investments. We have to make a lot more noise about the opportunities laying in startups, because you have a lot of entrepreneurs, but they're not really known, and the people with the money who could actually invest in them are not really, let's say, they don't really know what's the real opportunities in that. They're not really aware of that. And I would say, to finish with that first question, also some work on the legal frameworks. When you're a startup, one of the first goal you're trying to achieve is to find a scalable business model. And in order to develop and to maybe launch in other countries, for instance, with the legal doctrine we're trying to open now in Tunisia and Morocco, you have to have the necessary funds. But if you're considered as just like other companies, you don't have like tax benefit or parafiscal charges reduction, it will be really hard, because all the money that you could invest into investment, into hiring the best talents, who, as Frederick just said, are just fleeing countries because they have some exceptional job offers. If you don't have the money to compete with that, it will be like impossible just to scale and to have really good startups and then entrepreneurs creating value.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned one very key aspect in all of this, and I think that is internet penetration. Access to the internet is becoming a challenge, and if that is a challenge, then we really do not have any sort of basis for digitization. Could you indicate one of what governments could potentially do? Because this aspect is very touchy, because some governments are very wary on how much internet access also goes to a lot of the youth. So internet penetration, even though they have the ability to generate, or they have the funds to drive digitization or to drive internet penetration, they may choose not to. Could you comment on that, please?
Yes, so that's a good observation. Like, for instance, in many countries in Africa, you have periods where you have shutdowns, governments deciding to shut down the economy. Many entrepreneurs and startups actually died because, died in the sense of they lost a lot of money, a lot of profit, and they just had to close their doors because of these shutdowns. So that's one aspect of the question, and I think we need to have some basic internet rights. We're starting to see that more and more across the world. I'm talking about, of course, internet access, which is the first basic internet rights I would advocate for. But we also have trust, which is the most interesting to me, because all the innovation we're creating will work and will be adopted if users trust what we will do with their data. So I believe we need to work on trust also. So that would be like the right to be forgotten, the right to reclaim their own data, and also the right to intimacy, to decide to who their data is actually going to be shared, and to be sure that no one else will access it. Unless we have that, I believe that, especially in African countries, people are really they're a bit scared, about paying online, etc. There are a lot of scams. So unless we have trust, it will be extremely hard to actually have some big improvements in terms of financial and other sectors innovation on the internet. You also have, of course, the respect of privacy, which is one right that is already not advocated for.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned a very good point with respect to data protection and this aspect of actually creating a digital footprint, where many people are actually wary because they're worried about, either scams or also being, spied on by their own respective governments. Now, having said that, Siyabonga, you are someone who has been a trailblazer in terms of really driving change on the continent. And what I mean in respect to being a trailblazer, you are someone who has taken a business, scaled it, all right, and now you have forged partnerships with different companies in the US and UK. With COVID being the major impediment to continental growth over the past 6 months, how can Africa, and for that matter, the youth of Africa, really seek to adopt some of these digital technologies as a means to generate business and improve continental growth? Sibonga? Hello? Okay, I don't think we're getting through to Sibonga. Nareshka, are you there with us? Yeah, okay. So look, related to that question, then maybe I can readapt it to your company, Shockley. You assist many of these small businesses to develop an online presence. What have you seen during this pandemic, and how have you experienced this surge in companies looking at digital e-commerce as a driver of their business? And how has COVID either been a positive force or an impediment toward them? Can't you? Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you for that question. It's a great question. I think especially now, COVID was definitely the accelerator of digitization in South Africa, and I think Southern Africa for that matter. Me personally, in my space during this pandemic, I saw businesses either close down or thrive. And the businesses that closed down were the ones that had high overheads and a singular presence. When I refer to a singular presence, I mean they either had a physical office or a brick and mortar store. The businesses that thrived are the ones that had both brick and mortar and online stores. Even though their physical stores were closed down during lockdown, there was shutdown. The online stores were open and people were still able to shop, which meant they had that steady flow of income coming through. And it allowed them to cover their expenses and then make a profit. So those were the businesses that thrived. Our company, we saw a surge in companies going online, companies that watched the success of other business making this profit and sort of thriving, realized very quickly that they need to take their business online, or else they won't survive. Right now, COVID, it's either you innovate or die. And with that being said, we also found and we also saw something that's really interesting is a lot of companies have been coming to us for custom solutions, which has been very exciting for us because in our field, we're always doing different things. So for example, doctors, we worked a lot with telehealth and them having virtual consults with customers. Then there were e-learning solutions. A lot of schools had to shut down, so you had to take universities and schools online. It was taking the academies online. There were also booking systems being put into place. So in terms of e-commerce, in terms of what we've been seeing, it's just accelerated during this time.
Okay. Siyabonga, sorry we missed you
Yes.
earlier, but I wanted to ask you, I mean, Nareshka mentioned something very interesting. If you're not, digitizing or you're not innovating, you're dying.
Yeah.
Given the fact that, you have taken a company from the bottom up where you have expanded internationally and you're one of the success stories in South Africa. Looking at COVID as this major either driver of digitization in Africa, how can more youth basically jump onto this bandwagon? What would you tell a lot of them, given the fact that you were a youth entrepreneur at one point and now you have gotten to that point of success? What would you recommend to them?
Look, I would say each and every entrepreneur, each and every youth will have the challenges and the struggles, right, to build a business. And listening from almost everyone that spoke onto the panel, they spoke about the challenges with access to internet, right, the infrastructure, right. So I would say that two things, actually. The first one is, one, you have to be curious. The second part is that you have to be hungry. By curiosity, I mean that, if you think about a number of solutions or the challenges that we're actually facing in the country, just by moving even money from one country to another, it becomes a challenge, right? So you have to be curious about what kind of innovative solutions one can bring. So that alone will allow the entrepreneurs to thrive over and above the challenges that we're actually facing as a continent. So I think those are the things that one can look into. Just the other person that just spoke now, looking at a number of businesses from brick and mortar that are looking to e-commerce, and they're looking at digitalizing their solutions, right? So I think that we have a number of resources, and looking at your bigger or large corporates such as your IBM, your Google, your Microsoft, has managed to set up shop in the continent. So they are helping entrepreneurs in the continent to make sure that to make sure that we have access to resources, not just resources alone, but technical assistance as well. So we have to be curious and use the resources that they actually provide for us to build sustainable businesses in the continent.
Okay. Frederick, are you there? Okay. Yes, perfect. You know, hearing what Sibonga mentioned, you know, you have been someone at the forefront of enabling a lot of small businesses in Africa to grow. What would you say would be some of the most difficult aspects of, you know, this concept of digital inclusion during the time of COVID?
You know, like we say, every crisis has a silver lining. When you look at the fortunes of a company such as Zoom, see, because of the COVID situation, how much it's been able to grow its revenues. So it is, as someone said, you've got to innovate or die. And that drive, you know, to try and look for solutions during a crisis period is the one that is going to help you succeed. I was just looking at 2 restaurants in Kenya, for example. One of them, you know, when the government came up with lockdown, you know, measures, said, you know, there's nothing we can do. So we just wait for the government to open. And during that time, they've got to pay rent and that sort of thing. So survival becomes almost impossible. Another one said, oh, let's become digital. Let's develop home deliveries. You know, let's develop other, you know, delicacies that people like, you know, that they can enjoy from home. And that company is thriving. So innovation and trying to be imaginative, trying to look for solutions, that's what is going to help you survive. And that means that SMEs sometimes do not have the capacity, they do not have the necessary skills. And what we as Jobs for Africa Foundation have been able to do and recommend, we had a webinar, Africa, you know, post COVID-19, economic recovery and job creation. And the idea was to try and see what are some of the skill sets we can promote amongst, you know, small and medium-sized enterprises. We are launching a number of courses in the area of digital skills, hard skills, but also soft skills, you know, critical thinking. You know, how do you survive in such a difficult environment? And this is, we hope, is going to provide the skill sets for companies to be able to face difficult situations like we are facing currently.
So it's so essentially you're saying that, you know, we need to adapt, or we need to adopt the best practices of humankind, which is adapting to any situation.
Definitely.
And what type of tools, you know, related to that, you know, Gibran, I think that, you know, you might be able to, you know, provide some sort of insight on the type of tools maybe that, you know, a lot of youth could look at with respect to adaptation, but also looking at, you know, what types of technologies could enable some of these entrepreneurial, you know, initiatives among many of the people at the BOP, at the bottom of the pyramid.
Thank you very much. Just to add to the conversation, I believe everything has been already said. You have to innovate. When we faced the lockdown in Algeria, for instance, like our activity is to provide legal information. So you either look for some information on our database or you receive our legal monitoring. So what we did is that we gave our monitoring for free during the first month of the lockdown. And we actually launched a series of webinars because a lot of companies, a lot of entrepreneurs had difficulty to access legal information. They had to know how they could like respect their duties, but it was hard to have some meaningful answers from like, let's say, sources. So we actually put the best legal experts during webinars, and they could you know, have Q&A sessions with them. And so that really gave us a lot of visibility on the web, on the social media, etc. And our clients were really they were really how to say that. Let's just say they were really happy about that. We have more than 1,800 clients, mainly businesses, and they were really glad that they could find answers during this tough period. So I would say, as Nureshka has said, and as everyone has said also, trying to find some easy ways to reach out to people using technology. That could be just launching a WordPress website, that could be launching a YouTube channel, anything that could make some meaningful connection toward your audience. So yeah.
Okay. Is it just checking? Ida, are you there? Okay. I guess she's still not there. Siyabonga, tell me this: as the future of work is changing, how do you see the adoption of technology on the continent enabling entrepreneurs to play catch up to the rest of the world? And what I mean is that we have this sense of, or this notion of what a gig economy is. Can you describe, what is happening in your surroundings in terms of what local entrepreneurs are doing to really partake in this sort of gig economy space? Siyabonga? Okay, I guess he's not there. Nureshka, perhaps you can end up, answering that question, because I still think that, you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm pretty sure that, for them to address this sort of new, I don't want to say new, I would say this sort of concept of gig economy and enabling this sort of freelance type of work. Could you, shed your thoughts on that? I can't hear you.
Hear me now? I think Rebon had some insight into it's all about getting an MVP out there. So to be part of that and to get started, that I think is the first main, it's your starting point. You need some starting point, and I think an MVP is what you need. So even if it's getting your social media set up, or getting your online platform set up, some way of creating awareness of who you are. Entrepreneurs can do that. Entrepreneurs can be part of that. Siyabonga mentioned something very interesting about curiosity and hunger. I think that plays also of it. Yes, lockdown and COVID may have thrown a curveball of shutting us down for a bit. But I think there are areas where entrepreneurs need to position themselves by putting out a minimum viable product as a starting point. And then from there, take it and make it and scale it into something bigger.
Frederick, could you indicate, I'm glad, Nureshka, you mentioned this concept of MVP. Could you indicate, some of the things going on in the Kenyan environment? And I say this because, I live in Nairobi half the time, and I know that there are some really unique application like Link, where, companies are looking at this, not companies, but people are looking at this approach of, the gig economy. Could you explain some of the other success stories that there are, and tie it into what Nureshka mentioned as MVP, and just so that people know a little bit more what MVP means? It's most viable product. Am I correct, Nureshka?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a term that is used by many pre-startups to actually get a project or a product out prior to it actually growing to scale. Am I correct on that, Nureshka?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, when you mentioned MVP, I thought of LeBron James because I'm a basketball fan. Uh, Interesting. Ida, because I'm personally based in Switzerland, but Ida would have been the right person to mention this. But I don't know. You must have read in the papers a young man, aged 25 years, who invented a device because he's got. I think you must have seen that in the papers. He's got a nephew who is deaf, and he invented a device that could enable him to communicate, with his nephew, translate that from sign language and be able to vocalize, what the nephew was saying. And it was such an invention that it received an award from an American organization. This is just a young man aged 25 using the mobile phone and that sort of thing. So there are examples of young people, trying to come up with technology that is not only able to solve, some of the problems they face at home, but challenges that the world faces. And this is able to put Africa on the world map.
No, I'm glad that you mentioned that, and it's nice to see some of these success stories. In respect to that, Siabonga, you are someone who, again, and I'm picking on you on this, has managed to create a successful startup that is partnering internationally. With the future of work changing, how do you see the adoption of technology on the continent as an enabler to play catch up to the rest of the world? And just to get your thoughts on this gig economy and what can more African, young entrepreneurs do to really jump on this sort of, bandwagon?
Thanks for the question. I think that the adoption of technology in the
Hello? I think we lost Siabonga. Yeah. Are you there? Hello, Siabonga, can you hear us? Okay. I guess I will skip him and I'll allow him to give his thoughts a bit later. Gibran, beyond the legal, tech sector and beyond, the financial arena, how do you see digitization in areas such as agriculture and health play in terms of improving, continental growth?
Thank you for this question. It's true that I'm not an expert in these fields, but I believe that these are two sectors that are really like the basis of any kind of economy. So, of course, we need more innovation. We need more access to digital solutions regarding access to healthcare. I believe COVID has proved that by many means. So I would just say that you have a lot of innovation that is possible. You have to also find really impactful solutions because we're talking about the lives of people. I saw drones, for instance, in Kenya, delivering blood in the mountains because you didn't have roads in order to access some foreign or some faraway villages. So that's a kind of simple solution. It's not that simple, but it's effective. So I would really look for some local use cases and some great execution because you have to be really dedicated to the cause you're actually taking care of. It's important matters. And regarding agriculture, well, I saw some innovations in agriculture, especially in terms of helping like farmers access markets. I think that there is a lot of value for startups in this kind of field, just linking people of the food chain together, helping them access markets more easily, have more visibility. Then, of course, you could have online shops directly linking farmers to other suppliers, or just, have some information on supply and demand. You have a startup in Senegal which does that, just giving the prices of the different products every day or on demand. Those are really easy solutions that could really help, let's say, the farmers. But if we're talking about really big, disruptive and innovative ideas, I believe that industry, big industry, will be able to actually make some insightful and some impactful developments regarding agriculture.
Okay, and related to this, but still unrelated, is the aspect of EdTech. And Narushka, you have been a key proponent of EdTech on the continent. With respect to that, how can, for one, and there are two questions related to this concept of EdTech. How can more youth understand what some of the technologies are behind, educating themselves in terms of the digital world? But more importantly, your current business, academy to address online learning. How can other government how can African governments really improve this aspect of digital learning online? And given the fact that COVID has prevented many schools to be shut down on the continent, right? What could they do, and what could you advise young African entrepreneurs to look at with respect to improving their level of education within this field of digital world?
Thanks for that question. It's actually really interesting because at the panel discussion I was on before this, for the Top Women's Conference, it came up about how do we introduce EdTech to the youth and to younger people. And I think it all starts from school, and for them to actually learn how to use a computer and get the digital literacy, it needs to start earlier in terms of that. When it comes to a surge in online education, we definitely saw this, especially during lockdown. Learning had to continue, and educators and tutors had to find ways to make this happen, and they took their business online. So whilst we continued to work on Lit Academy, we saw a greater potential and a greater need to create learning platforms for the young entrepreneurs that you are talking about and business owners, because they lacked digital skills that you needed. And this actually motivated a colleague and I to start an initiative called She Means Business. And She Means Business is aimed to inspire, it's aimed to help, it's aimed to educate women entrepreneurs, more specifically, on how to use EdTech to better their businesses, to give them the digital skills they need. So She Means Business is going to be running free courses on helping women and their businesses. But I think more importantly, to answer your questions, I believe the African government needs to invest in ensuring that there's internet. And I think Frederick mentioned it, and he mentioned the success of that in Kenya. And like you said, to enable for greater opportunities with e-commerce, if there is internet in these areas, it will in turn improve the economies. It's an investment, and it needs to be seen as an investment. In saying that, I mean, the government is aware. Last year at the World Economic Forum, Ericsson committed to bring 5G to the African continent, and I think they're working on that. I know MTN was speaking about making data cheaper. There's also an event I attended at Facebook Africa where the Minister of Telecommunications in South Africa, Minister Stella Ndabeni Abrahams, she also mentioned that if we want to help increase the economy in the rural areas, we need to make sure that there's internet for them, that there's digital, that they are digitally skilled and digitally lit. So I think it's on the government's agenda, but COVID really just put the brake on the implementation of it all. So I definitely think the governments see it. I definitely think that the governments know they have to invest in it, and it will come. So I'm pretty positive and I'm confident that we will see a commitment from them. And I'm very excited about this time.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very, interesting time, and it's also, it leaves someone in a state of flux because we don't necessarily know where we're going. But in relation to that, and I do want to get, Siyabonga's thoughts on this. Siyabonga, the question I was trying to ask you earlier is what can more Africans do to really, the gig economy? And given what Noreshna mentioned about Sheening's business, how can more young girls really partake in this sort of digital revolution?
Look, I think it's first understanding the challenges that we are actually facing, right? So I know that there will be a lot of innovation around different industries. So we need to make sure that we have the necessary skills to prepare the necessary skills so that we can bring those kind of innovations. The education system will need to change and adapt to with tech. And the changes that we're actually facing into the continent, right? So it's changing the curriculum into the educational space. I know cybersecurity is going to be something really big when you look at artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on and so forth. So that kind of skill sets we will need to prepare ourselves so that we can make sure that we innovate onto that regard. Access to funding as well as resources that are already existing and available that are provided by major companies such as Facebook, as mentioned, such as Google and other big companies that are actually already around the country. And also a lot of incubators and accelerators should be able to make sure that they get entrepreneurs to explore these solutions, to explore these resources that are at the moment available.
Thank you, for those thoughts. Now, we don't have much time, but I just wanted to end up asking everyone if they could take about 30 seconds to give your last thoughts in relation to this concept of digitization of the continent. Maybe we can start with you, Gibran.
Thank you very much, Ali. So yes, I think when we talk about digitization of the continent, maybe we really should focus on maybe countries, regions, or even cities. We have some big divides between even the cities in the same regions in many African countries. So I believe we really need to think local and to keep in mind that everything that we're developing right now in Africa could have some potential opportunities to find markets abroad. And we have some really good advantages, starting with the cost of work. So if we find some meaningful solutions here and that they are scalable abroad, I believe we can have some really good success stories.
Okay. Frederick, do you have any last thoughts, comments?
Basically reiterating what I said, the role of governments is critical. They need to make the necessary investments, not only in infrastructure, but also in education, especially in STEM subjects. And then companies need to innovate. And I wanted to mention the example of Peter Trigger Foods, who has come up with very innovative technology in the food supply chain business, almost like Uber, and he's just attracted $3 million in terms of funding. So there are opportunities there, but we need to be innovative.
Yeah. I'm sorry we've run out of time, but I want to say thank you to each of the panelists and to Africa Innovation Week and to the people who've been watching on. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.